Hi everyone, and welcome back to another week's podcast with the NDIS Circle, the podcast aimed at providing clear and concise information about the NDIS and hosting empowering business discussions for NDIS providers. Today I'm excited to have Moara Prado as our guest. Moara is a seasoned NDIS growth consultant, a behavioural analyst and the growth and engagement consultant at Golden Hearts. I'm still working as a director at Jane's Care, sort of in an advisory role, and then doing some private consultation work in her own business. Known for her trauma-informed approach and her ability to interpret emotions, Moara works to guide participants, families and providers through the many complexities of the NDIS. She's also the founder, as I mentioned, of Moara and Care, her own business, where she delivers training and workshops and social groups for participants and carers. So today, Moara, we're going to dive into some of your work, how you came to work into the sector. Obviously, there's heaps of change in the NDIS at the moment, so maybe we can dive into some of those changes and what they mean for families and participants and providers in the space, and sort of explore how your passion, where you see the gaps in disability support and sort of, where you're sort of directing your energy. So without further ado, let's get started. Moara, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, having a chat with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Ned, for that beautiful introduction. It's always a bit confronting or overwhelming to hear about yourself, but it's really great to be here, and I think NDIS is a hot topic that needs to be spoken about. So really great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Awesome. So I was doing a little bit of podcasting research, as I do before I get a guest on. I was having a look at your website. You got there, you're an emotional interpreter, you're very in tune with emotions, and a sort of behavioral analyst. So for the uninitiated, what does that mean, and why are those skills so important with, supporting participants and providers through the NDIS process? It can be a pretty stressful one, can't it?
No, definitely. So my background is in behavioral science, and for anyone that's listening that doesn't really know what that means, not in an NDIS sense, it's really listening to the room, that the unspoken of the room. So how a lot of body language, a lot of analyzing if that person is comfortable, if they're open to speaking to you, if they're not, how are they receiving or interpreting information. So sometimes you can see that you're talking too much or too fast, or the kind of language that you're using is scaring them off, and they're not able to digest that. So I guess part of my work and my skill is understanding how the information is coming across, taking a step back, formulating a better way to communicate with that person at that level that they're at. But that doesn't just include participants. That includes, in an NDIS review, for example, going in and analysing how much does that planner understand of that disability? How much does that planner understand of what we're trying to feed her? And instead of getting escalated, instead of, using emotion, we use a little bit of reason to kind of step back and be really careful about how we're presenting ourselves in a way to have a favorable outcome. So things like simple little things like knowing your team. Like, are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? Where should I schedule my team's meeting? If half of my team's morning, half of my team's afternoon, probably at lunchtimes, to get the better outcome out of everybody. So really analyzing the room to get the best outcome for whoever you're with, as a participant, as a business, as a provider, as just a human being.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and I like how you brought up the NDIS review meeting specifically. Obviously I sort of sit on the other side now as a provider, supporting participants and families in that meeting, which it's sort of stressful being on both sides. So I used to be an NDI planner for many years as well. I've done like hundreds and hundreds of meetings. I don't even know how many planning meetings I've done, but it was always it can feel very high stakes, and it is for people. It is quite high stakes. The outcome of those meetings can determine whether they have the supports that they need to do the things they want to do and have a good quality of life for the next year, or if they get a bad outcome, it could potentially put them at serious, safety risk. Like, that's sort of the difference that it can make. So, and I love what you're saying around, obviously it can be a really emotionally charged situation, but if you're able to sort of just hold that and then communicate in fact and not opinion, because that's what the planners sort of deal with, that's probably going to be your best path to achieving a good outcome. So that's great. And how did you mentioned, so you studied behavioural, you're a sort of behavioural analyst, you studied that prior to coming into the NDIS. Were you always in human services, always in disability, or did you start your career and study going in a different direction and pivoted? What's been sort of your journey into the NDIS so far?
So my mum is a nurse and a psychologist, and I spent my whole life saying, I'm not going to do nursing, I'm not going to do psychology. So then I got a scholarship into uni for writing. I did my extension English and I wrote a piece, and I was like,
Cool.
yes, amazing. I'm going to go and study literature, and I absolutely loved it. And then, you know how you can have electives at uni? It's like, oh, I'm just going to dip my toe in a little bit of social justice. I'm just going to, and then I started doing psychology electives, and then next thing I know, I was doing half a degree of psychology, and then next thing I know, I was doing nursing, and then I was doing prac in the hospital, and then 6 years later, I graduated with like a behavioral science degree of nursing and psychology.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. That's so similar to my experience as well. I think we're so influenced by our parents and figures around us, aren't they? Including myself, 4 family members, we all work in the NDIS. So yeah, you're just so influenced by people, aren't you? That's awesome. And so that's sort of where your passion for social justice came from, and your passion for the care industry and support industry. I know you're sort of really up to date with the changes to the NDIS, and it feels like it's just moving at breakneck speed at the moment. Like it's always been a fast moving environment, but even in the last sort of like 3, 6, 9 months, that feels like there's been a huge amount of changes. What are some of the sort of more major recent changes with the scheme that you think will have the most impact on participants and providers? Yeah. How are you sort of keeping up with everything?
Well, I think so I'm happy to hear that you were a planner. So likewise, I was a planner as well, and I think that there's just been such a huge disconnect. People look at planners as if they're not human, and that they're scared to have like a heart-to-heart conversation to say no. And this is, I guess, where that skill of bringing the emotional down and not allowing you to escalate, to actually have a human-to-human talk with the scheme. Sorry, I know that went a little bit off topic, but I think what the scheme is trying to do, the changes, they're trying to bring the scheme back to what it was originally meant to do. So for me, there are actually not many changes at all. It's just trying to cut out the misinformation that people have. So a lot of people don't know that the NDIS is not for everybody. A lot of people think I have a disability, automatically I'm eligible for the NDIS, and then they suffer and they have that huge frustration that could easily be solved by someone with knowledge saying, actually, there are other services for you. I think that's one big thing that they're trying to stop, is the fact that if you're not eligible, people are just turning their backs on them, saying, oh, you've got a disability that's not on the list, there's nothing we can do. No, you need to be accountable to say, actually, there are other services out there. Australia's an incredible country. We have an incredible system. You just haven't looked hard enough. So let me help you. Let's look at all the stuff in the mainstream. Let's look at all the stuff in the community. I think that's what the NDIS is trying to really pull back for. It did give a lot of freedom in terms of the reasonable and necessary, but as we have been seeing, what's reasonable for me is not reasonable for you, and a lot of people have been quite creative around using supports. And as you can see in the list, like things like cattle therapy and tarot reading, I can completely understand and have an argument as to why that would be really beneficial for some people, but also, again, the misunderstanding that the NDIS is not a bucket of endless money, and that there are 5.4 million Aussies with a disability. I think the changes are not really changes, they're just getting stricter, and they're just kind of narrowing it down. Whereas before they were kind of like a broader, let's see if we can help you, let's see what we can do. Now it's like, no, we're only helping these people, these other people are going to be allocated to this, there are other supports for you. So I think the changes are positive. I think that a lot of people, especially in Sydney, honestly, coming from WA to the eastern states, are gobsmacked. Every single person in here has an NDIS business. Everyone that you talk to, you go to networking meetings, and everybody does everything everywhere. And it's scary. It's really scary.
I've heard the same thing I was talking to a provider. I recently went over to Melbourne, and I was talking to a NDIS provider over there, and they have an office in Melbourne. who just started one in Perth. They've got an office in Sydney, and they were saying in Sydney, yeah, you just go for a drive. NDIS provider, NDIS everywhere. There were shop fronts. People been renting out their, homes for short-term. It's just, yeah, it's not like that in Perth, is it?
No. No, I mean, I think that it's catching on a little bit more, but definitely I have to say people in Sydney are extremely creative, extremely creative. But it's really sad because when you start to dig deep and ask these providers just any question, anything a little bit deeper than the sales pitch, they don't have an answer for you. And that's sad. And so we're losing meaning of what the NDIS is for. If you go into the NDIS to make money, you're in the wrong business. Like NDIS is not something that you're going to get rich from. And if you are, you're probably not doing the right thing. Like I know that there's a lot of providers now that are closing the doors and going broke because they're trying to service really complex participants and running out of funding. NDIS is behind the reviews by 9 months. So they're having to either take them to hospitals, which by values and morals they don't want to do. They don't want to be seen as just exiting somebody into the hospital, but then they're having to wear the cost of providing that support pro bono, and that's hundreds of thousands of dollars, while people, like, no offense, but support coordinators, if they're not on top of it, if they're not doing the right thing, it's not coming from their pocket. Do you know what I mean? Like they're like, oh yeah, I'll get to it, or yes, I've submitted the review, but it's not enough to submit a review. You need to be on the phone calling, you need to be escalating, you need to be sending emails. Like my emails got to the point where I'm like, this person is going to die. I'm desperate. Please help. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do because the system is not perfect, but it works if we all work together. And that's the thing. We need to work as an organism. I think right now, again, you guys have been pretty lucky in WA because the supply is only just increasing. But in the eastern states, no one's working as a team. No one talks to each other. Everyone kind of just does their own thing and it's all falling apart because everyone has to be accountable. Like as a SIL provider, you have to be accountable to know your participants' funding, to know when it's going to finish, to know if you need to provide additional support. What's your plan? What's your contingency plan? And allow that family, that guardian, the stakeholders, hey, yes, we can increase from 1 to 2 to 2 to 1. However, in 3 months' time, if we don't have a review, we will be then dropping them off at the hospital. Like allow that time and keep reminding them, keep reminding the support coordinator. Do you know what I mean? Like it all plays a piece. We need to work together as a team because otherwise it's not going to survive.
Yeah. I think we're pretty lucky here in WA. Like I worked in the state funded system prior to the rollout of the NDIS. It's a really strong system of local coordinators, and I think there's sort of a culture of collaboration, and it's sort of like a small world in the WA disability sector. So I hope that we can sort of retain that, what's the right word, sort of like collegiality and collaboration. I feel like we've still got that feel. It's more collaboration than competition at this stage. Whether that remains the same, we'll just have to see, but so far I still feel that. I've always felt that with other providers that I've talked to. I think, what you're saying around the NDIS not being for everyone with a disability is certainly true. I think the missing piece is that those foundational supports from the state government. I think other services and organisations, us as a whole community, are sort of seeing the NDIS as the oasis in the desert. So that's okay that the NDIS isn't for everyone, but there just needs to be robust supports for people with disability that aren't eligible for the NDIS. So I think that's maybe a piece that just needs a little bit more work, but obviously that's been a recommendation in the recent NDIS review to really build out those more robust foundational supports from the state government. So as that sort of builds back up again, I think that will really take the pressure off the scheme and hopefully bring costs down and make it more sustainable for future generations.
100%. And I have to agree, like WA's system and community support is amazing, but there are so many other mainstream services that people don't know and they don't use. So I think, yes, NDIS needs to be strong on that and take on that recommendation, but also the awareness of free supports, like the free mental health nurse that people in WA get for the 3 months. They're incredible. And there are lots of them, and it takes one simple GP form to get that done. A lot of people don't know, and they're banging on, I don't have any more supports, I don't have this, but there's these incredible people who are skilled in that, waiting to be used. Over here as well, so many different grants, so many different systems. I found out about the school, the education pays for transport for people with disabilities, so we don't have to use the transport budget, because people under 18 rarely receive, core supports or transport. So these systems do exist. I think they're just kind of hidden away. And like you said, like, we think NDIS, the savior, everything that's more expensive is better. Anything that's paid for is what we need to go for. When the truth is, we actually have amazing systems in place already that people just don't know about.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and some of the stuff that you're mentioning there around, mental health nurse, like, I don't even know. Maybe it's, how can we sort of collate and share that information so everyone's aware of everything that's out there? So yeah, okay. And what do you some of the changes, maybe perhaps they're not such pure changes, they're also clarification points, right? And sort of refinement. So like mandatory registration and compliance. How do you feel about that change? Obviously, that's a big change that all the providers are going to most likely be going through, getting registered. I think at last count, it's like 80 or 90% of providers are unregistered. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's going to be good for the scheme?
Yes, it's so funny because initially when the scheme first started, I was all about self-managed and plan-managed. And then I started to understand that people actually really struggle to understand the scheme because it hasn't been delivered successfully in a way that people can understand. I guess a part of my role is simplifying things. And the NDS to me is really simple. These are the things you can do. These are the things you can't do. But for other people, I think people that are trying to make a business or whatever, they don't understand. But also a lot of people that don't understand disability got into the scheme. So they don't understand the impact of, I'll just overservice and then somebody else can do with a review. No, then that person might not get a wheelchair for 6 months. Do you know what I mean? Like, one little thing for that person's life is such a huge impact. So I think people need to be accountable. NDIA was the role model of accountability by not allowing people to know planners' names, by not allowing people to know their number. And I understand that because of all the backlash that we received as planners. But we need, I can't tell you how many people that seek me for consulting who's like, hey, I want to open a business on an NDIS. Tell me what I need. And I'm like, okay, tell me what you know about disability. Nothing. I'm like, how are you going to report this back to the NDIS? I'll just pay somebody to do it. Like, there's such a huge gap. So I do think that we do need some sort of compliance system, sort of auditing. And to be fair, the auditing system is actually really great. It weaves out the people that are not serious about this work. And I think you need to be accountable to writing good reports that are going to help your participant in the future. And not everybody is a good match for that.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen recently there's clarification, I think it was from the Commission or Bill Shorten's office, like, hey, if you use consultants to help you through your audit, that's fine. But just know, you as a provider, you have responsibility for your organisation. You have responsibility for how you're reporting incidents or complaints and managing risk and all that sort of thing. So go ahead, use consultants if you need, but be aware, if you use sort of copy and paste templates to pass your audit, you need to be across what the governance of your organisation still as a director. You still have that responsibility. So I thought that was a good clarification point. And the in and out list of funded supports, how are you feeling about that? That's sort of, yeah, you're a planner as well. So there's a lot of similarities between that list and I remember what we used to use as operational guidelines, and we're making a plan in terms of what's the responsibility of the health system, what do we fund, what do we not fund. Obviously, as you already mentioned in this discussion, reasonable and necessary looks different for me than it would for you. But going through that list, it seemed like it was sort of just a more public reflection of the operational guidelines that are used at the NDI internally to sort of make funding decisions. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just they're starting to find out that common sense is not so common. So they're having to spell out a lot of things. And again, just clarifying that the NDIS is not for everything. It's definitely not for everyone. It's definitely not for everything. And I think what we see a lot in mental health is when we give too much, or we give too much support, we're actually disabling the person and we're not giving them the opportunity to succeed. So I think that some people, unfortunately, not everybody, but some people feel very entitled that the NDIS has to pay for everything. They have to pay for my rent. They have to pay for this. And it's like, we're actually just doing you a disfavor because you are able, you do have capacity. We want to help you get there. And I think that the list, I agree with this. I haven't seen a lot of people with a backlash about the changes because, again, we're just doing what the system. Bill Shorten gave a talk a month ago, and he's like, we're just doing what the system was supposed to do in the first place. And I agree with that. I had to like read it a couple of times to be like, am I going crazy? Like nothing is really changing. They're just really defining everything that we've always been trying to implement.
Yeah. But I think more clarity is so important because, what is that? What 500,000 Australians on the NDIS is a huge amount of people, and then you got, say you're a parent and another parent turns to you when you're doing school pickup and they go, the NDIS takes my kid to school, my kid gets therapy 3 times a week, and then as a parent you're going, what? My kid's pretty similar needs to your child. Like there's that lack of consistency there, and I think that's sort of led, some people are using their funds for this, and then other parents or other people are going, oh, I didn't know that. So I just think more clarity is really helpful. So you want that clarity while still enabling a little bit of flexibility for obviously individual situations, and everyone's different, while sort of aligning with like the principles of the NDIS and that everything sort of needs to be related to your disability. So yes.
I think everyone that really understands and works the scheme, exactly like I said, it's exactly what we want. And I think that the misconception is that people that work in hospitals, that work in schools or university, know and understand the NDIS. There's a lot of people, a majority of people that work in hospitals, like social workers and things, who also complicate that because then their version of the NDIS is, no, the NDIS needs to fund this, but it's really, we need to work together. Like you need to better your knowledge, so then it makes our job easier instead of just fighting you on what's funded, what's not, what's ours, what's yours, because they are seeing as a high hierarchy. Oh, the hospital said you fund this, and it's like, we've never funded this.
Yeah, totally. So tell us about some of your work you're doing at the moment. You got your own business, doing a bit of work there, director at Jane's Care, doing some consultancy at Golden Hearts. Yeah, talk to us a bit about what you're up to at the moment.
I'm wearing many hats, but mostly.
Did I get that right?
All of my work is bringing meaning and purpose into people's lives. So either if that's a participant, or if that's one of my employees, or if that's a co-worker or a business, it's always trying to find, what did you get in here for? What purpose or meaning are you bringing to yourself, and are you bringing to this work? And then how can we apply that to what's possible in your realm? So with participants, the work that I love doing that in WA. Like we created SEAL communities, what we call them. So we took like the whole building. So there's 14 apartments, 7 at the bottom, 7 at the top. And then every Sunday we have barbecues. Every Monday we have board games. One of the apartments is solely like a chill space, because we want participants to engage. We want them to connect with each other. We don't want them to just have support workers as friends. So that's like a really, really enjoyable part of my role and what I love the most. And then I'm bringing that to New South Wales now. I'm all about collaboration. So I love working with like-minded people and seeing how we can work together. There's always a way that we can work together. And yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
Awesome. Very exciting. I saw I think it was on your LinkedIn, you went to Bali a little while ago, maybe last year or earlier this year. You visited, I think it was Ubud, and saw a pretty sort of innovative, like the way that people with disabilities are living good lives there. It sounded really interesting. Would you mind talking about that for a couple of minutes and just, describing what you saw there?
Yes, definitely. So I'm the description of living, breathing work. Anywhere that I go, I'm always like, is this accessible? What would somebody with a disability think about this place? And so I was on holidays in Bali, and I was at the villa, and I'm thinking, I wonder if they have accessible villas here. And I said to one of the Balinese men that worked there, and I was like, can you take me somewhere with disabilities? And he was like, he had to talk to a few people, and then he took me to this community that's 100% built and funded by the people that live in there. So they've got zero help from the government. They all have some sort of physical or mental disability, but they have to be able to be on their own. So it can't be too complex. Most of the people that are extremely complex live with their families or unfortunately don't survive. And what they did is just incredible. They modified this whole place. So the gardens, how they reach to the gardens, how they get back into the wheelchairs. They modified the sinks. It was incredible. They built their own SDA. And they sleep 4 people to a bed because they can't afford anything else. And then they do crafts and they perform as a way to pay the rent because it's rented. And they take volunteers. So they take volunteers to learn English, they take volunteers to teach yoga. And I think that's a great example of resilience and perseverance and capacity and what we take away from people when we give them too much. So part of the reports of the NDIS is that a huge amount of people weren't actually using the supports because they were just waiting to receive more supports. I had a participant who, before she had an NDIS plan, she was attending TAFE 4 times a week. She was showering, she was doing great. Then she got 12 hours a day support. She stopped showering, she stopped going to TAFE, and then she was always like, no, my support worker needs to do this, my support worker needs to do that. And I guess that's where the trauma-informed approach comes in, because we need to realize that we can't just be too much and we can't just be too little. There is a balance, and I think going to Bali and just seeing them flourish without any assistance, without any help. They don't have a single support worker. They saw an OT. They make their own gym equipments. It was insane. And I was like, when was the last time you saw an OT? And then he was like, well, about 7 years ago, an OT came from Perth and she was doing some volunteer work. And I'm going, oh my God, these. So if you're ever there, or if anyone ever listening or watching this, it's in Ubud. You can literally ask anybody in Bali. It's the only one that they have there, and it's right next to the yoga retreat in Ubud. It's amazing. They're super lovely. They'll sing to you. They love having visitors. So I encourage you to go and visit.
I'll have to go next time in Bali. Definitely overdue for a trip there. Yeah, it sort of speaks to like the power of the human spirit, doesn't it? And innovation when there's sort of no resources. So, and I think it's not just about the level or the amount of support, isn't it? It's also about the focus being on capacity building and, hey, you know, as a support worker, you're here to empower the person themselves to develop their own independent living skills and their own capacity for independence as an adult, rather than sort of jumping in and doing things for someone. It's doing things alongside a person where possible. So yeah, I think that's
and I think it's like over there, if you don't do it, if you don't get up and try, you die. Like if you don't get up and really do it, you're not going to move, you're not going to eat, you're not going to survive. But in Australia, it's like, if somebody doesn't do it for you, another person will come along because there's funding there. So that's the kind of mentality that we need to change.
Yeah. And with the NDIS Commission, I was reading through some announcements. They've expanded sort of the oversight and the teeth of the NDIS Commission, if you like, and penalties for providers if they cause harm to a participant. Where do you see like the most significant responsibilities lying for providers moving forward? Like, what do we need to be really focused on?
We need to be accountable for everything that's happening inside our services, inside our homes. I was so excited to see NDIS for end of the Commission finally blacklisting names. I think it's taken a long time for people to be accountable. I know that a lot of people kind of gave up on reporting to the Commission because just there's nothing done. I'm looking forward to seeing a couple providers being shut down due to neglect. I think it's not enough. As a director, when you sign on as a director, by law, you are saying that nothing happens inside your organization without your knowledge. Like by law. So if a support worker is neglectful and your participant dies in your care, as a director, you can't say, I didn't know about that. I didn't know that they weren't doing the reporting properly. I didn't know that that participant wasn't changed every 2 hours. They need to be accountable. It's not enough to just run a business. You need to be part of the business. You need to be on ground, and it's a human service. Like, you're dealing with people's lives. It's not a 9 to 5, go home and sign off. And if the business is not for you, then you need to reconsider, because people need to be held accountable.
Yeah, a huge responsibility that you take on as a director, isn't it? Supporting people within the organisation. Okay, and are there some sort of growth consultant? Are there some personalised approaches that you've seen that you've worked with providers, you know, Golden Hearts or Jane's Care or any other ones that have really made a big difference?
Yeah, so like depending on the service that they provide, my approach is I search around the area to see what's already being provided, what's available, and the gaps. And then together we come up with creative strategies in the realm of their possibilities, so what's achievable for them. So like a really random example is I ran into a guy that I actually did some NDIS consulting for when he first started his NDIS business a couple of years ago. And I was like, oh, like, tell me what's going on, what's the update? And he goes, oh, I kind of changed my market. I'm really into trauma informed care now and into breath work. So he's gone more into the allied health path. And then I said to him, just at the top of my head, I was like, oh, have you heard about the International Trauma Conference that's happening in Melbourne next year? And he hadn't. And then I encouraged him to apply. And then he did. And he sent me the abstract later that day. And then now he's talking in the midst of, like, I think it's 50,000 people that go to Melbourne. And he's just so excited. And he started looking into it. And then he started telling other people about it. And it's something that he's really passionate about. It's going to have a great impact because he's going to have extreme exposure. And then like simple things like that, because I guess I love learning what's around, and I'm really creative in terms of filling in the gaps and working together. So part of my work is just, who can you network with? Who can you connect with? How can we work together? What resources can you use, and what resources can you create?
Yeah, I love that. So it's pretty personalized as to the organization. You look at where the gaps are and match that with the organization's skill set and experience and what their niche is sort of going to be and their networks, and then develop a strategy from there. That's awesome.
Exactly.
And if providers are listening and they want to get in touch with you, that sounds exciting to them, and looking to grow their organization, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
You guys can contact me on my LinkedIn, which is just Moara Prado, MoaraPrado. Or my email is just moaraprado@hotmail.com.
Awesome, Moara. That was a great conversation, and I think it's really exciting time, and keen to follow you on your LinkedIn and see who you work with next. Sounds like you got a lot going on, but you're definitely up to it. So thanks so much for having a conversation with me.
Oh, thank you so much, and likewise, it's really great to see good support coordinators because it's missing. So I really appreciate that, and it's been lovely. Thank you.
Awesome, no worries. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next week on the NDIS Circle. Bye for now.